here we are. I've gathered two of the brightest minds in digital marketing for nonprofits. We happen to be, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 3 to 4 miles apart as the crow flies. But I've got with me today Tim Kachuriak and Jared Schremmer. Gentlemen, welcome to Group Thinkers.
Thanks, Justin.
It's good to have you both. And before we hit record, y'all, the two of you were just exchanging that. I think more often than not, you two either see each other bumping into each other in airports, or we see each other at conferences and hallways and those sorts of things. So it's actually really good just to get a little time to hang out and just chat. So I'm really thankful for both of your time. Also joined by Ronnie Richard of RKD Group, our head of content. Hey, Ronnie.
Hey, Justin. How's it going?
Good to see you. So so here we are. So the reason why we wanted to get everybody together was to talk about Gen X, and RKD Group has this study that we've put out on Gen X, and so really wanted to talk about it through a lens of both digital, but also through a lens of how your life experiences start to navigate some of your behaviors and choices. And why I find that so wonderful with the two of you is because you both hit like right in the line of the target demo for the study, but in different spots. So one of the main findings that you may have seen with the study is that there is an older Gen X and a younger Gen X, and they're two different people. And so, depending on where you fall in your household, how you felt growing up, older siblings, younger siblings, et cetera, as well as your own age, it can all influence your own patterns and behaviors and attitudes and beliefs, which can then in turn influence how you connect with nonprofits. So I think we're in store for a really good conversation. But just at the start, I want to have Jared and Tim share your journeys of how you got to where you are, and kind of what it is that you focus on right now as it relates to nonprofits. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and lead us off? Tell us your journey and how you got here.
So first of all, how old do you think I am? If I'm considered the old Gen Xer, I mean, I don't know if I want to be part of this party.
I mean, it's the salt and pepper, man. It's the salt and pepper.
All right.
Birds of a feather, okay? Birds of a feather.
More like an older Gen Xer, so I'll take it. So yeah, my journey, like probably most of us on this call today into the nonprofit space was, I guess, a very indirect one. So I graduated from college right after 9/11, desperately wanted to work in the field of marketing and advertising, but nobody was hiring. And I had great connections. I worked at a country club all during high school and college. And, I went with and met with the head of he was the president of the country club, and he was the president of the second largest ad agency in Pittsburgh. He's like, man, I'd love to hire you, but we just laid off 30 people. Can't help you. Right. So ended up, just kind of putzing around, picking up some freelance projects, and I started an interactive marketing company. Did that for about 5 years, and then just really wanted to do something that actually mattered. You know what I mean? Like, was achieving like some, small level of success, but was really more interested in significance. So I went and worked for a nonprofit ministry down in South Florida. I was there for about 18 months. The day I got there, the head of the ministry had a heart attack, which it's important to point out in this point in the story that correlation is not causation. At least I hope not. So hopefully I'm not the reason why he went away. But that's where I kind of discovered that there's basically like these agencies that work with nonprofits. And we worked with one based out of Dallas called KMA Direct Communications. You all know Tom McCabe. And Tom said, why don't you come to Dallas? We've been doing direct mail for 30 years, and we'd always wanted to start a digital fundraising division. Maybe you could do that for us. So that's how I got to Dallas in 2008. Was there for about 2.5 years. We got acquired by another agency. And through that time at KMA and the other agency, I just really became obsessed with trying to understand, how do you optimize the online giving experience? And that kind of led me on this quest to go and learn more about conversion rate optimization and decision science and testing and all that fun stuff. And that's kind of what led me to NextAfter here today.
When did you guys start NextAfter?
There's two kind of start dates. So like about 6 months after I got to KMA, I was like, this sucks, and I wasn't happy. And it turned out it was not like a problem with the company. It was a problem with Tim. So I actually set up NextAfter LLC in January 2009. And it lay dormant for several years. And then it was in May of 2012 that I left to pursue it full time.
Yeah, that's about the time that we met and connected, and follower of all of the content that you guys put out, and love your work, and love that we are neighbors. I mean, the fact that there's this hub in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, especially in North Dallas, the Frisco, Plano area, of so much good digital work that happens here that benefits nonprofits all over the place. I think it's incredible. Jared, now I want to tell your journey, but I'd like for you to tell it. Because I've heard you introduce yourself so many times that I could do it, but you go ahead, tell your journey.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to be as exciting as Tim's, but I when I had graduated school, I was convinced I wanted to go into marketing and advertising, and I had big dreams and aspirations, and I found my way to Dallas after graduating, and just through some connections, I ended up finding this really amazing organization that I began working with, a nonprofit here in Dallas, and I just was drawn to spend some time there, and I got a chance to spend about 2 years there, being a part of the great work that they're doing. And another really positive takeaway out of that, I met my wife while working at that organization. So it was a double win, and loved to be a part of that, loved being a part of that. And, it kind of was drawn back to my original objectives of, I want to, get into marketing or advertising. I'd love to be in an agency environment, and decided to start kind of pursuing that, and was looking around, and I stumbled across a marketing and fundraising agency that had a digital practice called IS7, and really kind of began my career in this space, where it ended up kind of connecting two worlds, a passion of helping people and being a part of nonprofits, but pursuing kind of this idea of exploring human behavior and what drives and motivates people to take action. And one of the things that really got me excited, similar to as Tim was talking about, kind of being obsessed on how to make this better. I kind of got really obsessed by what I think is a significant challenge in our space, and I've shared this with countless people we've interviewed over the years coming from the commercial space, where I say, you're coming from a marketing or advertising background where you were selling, something to drink, something to eat, something to drive, something to, play with, whatever it may be. And that's challenging. That comes with its fair share of obstacles. But when you come here, you're gonna, we're gonna try to help you, and you're gonna use your skills to try to encourage people to give their money to something, and all they're gonna get back is the idea that they made a difference, that they did something right, if we've done our job well. And I said, if once you can do that, then you can go somewhere else, and it's going to be so much easier to market and advertise if you can, if you have something to offer as part of the transaction beyond a feeling. And so it's been really fun and exciting on this journey, over the last 15 years of kind of exploring that and learning that. And one last thing is that I would just say is, especially in the past year plus with the pandemic, to get a chance to be exposed to how generous people are. And there's so much more we can do to engage that, but we've seen such amazing outpouring of generosity from people around the country. And so to be able to connect that and see how people will move and will act if you can do a good job of linking them up with causes and organizations that they're passionate about. So that's my story.
It's a great journey, man. And have been blessed to be alongside it, at least for the last 10 years. Tim, I like to say that, Jared had left somewhere along the way and did a tour of duty elsewhere, and then came back to the agency space. And I started actually the day before him, so I'm older and more mature, and know 24 hours more than Jared about this place. But obviously between the two of you, there's a lot of digital prowess that we could tap into. I want us to turn our conversation towards Gen X, and start with this lofty question of, do you think that it has been historically overlooked by nonprofits? Has it been a focus? Has it not been a focus? What do you think, and why? Jared, let's start with you.
Yeah, so when we had kind of embarked on this study, it got me thinking about this idea, and I think most would agree that Gen X is forgotten. I think it's forgotten within the fundraising space, but also, as we've looked around and studied, I think it's forgotten in the commercial space in a lot of ways too, as far as focusing on that generation. And I couldn't help but think that one of the reasons why is that for a lot of nonprofits in particular, they've had this large base of donors that have been supporting them for years, that made up of the boomers and silent generation, and so they're extremely thoughtful of them. And then probably about 10 years ago, organizations said we got to get younger, and so younger immediately meant millennials. And the really ironic thing is, a lot of the key leaders that were having those conversations, making those decisions, were Gen Xers themselves. And so so easy to forget about ourselves within that context of, well, what about my generation? What about the people that are a huge opportunity in front of us that we're not necessarily focused on, and we're not accounting for, because, and I think it's because as Gen Xers, we don't feel old, we don't feel young. We're right in between. Well, I'm not going to be the path to getting our donor base significantly younger, but I'm obviously not this old aging out group either, and we kind of forget ourselves.
Tim, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you did the study, because it's something that I've been curious about forever. I'm like, man, what about Gen X? What about us, right? And I have a slightly different theory as to why it's been overlooked. If you think about it, a lot of the stuff that we do in the nonprofit space kind of follows what happens in the commercial space, right? And you see how technology has kind of moved so quickly, and they've really focused on trying to market to this millennial group. And I think that the nonprofits just kind of adopted that wholesale, right? We kind of take a lot of the things that happen in the for-profit space, and we just adopt it and adapt it for our nonprofit world. But if you look at the numbers, I remember a few years ago, well, back in 2013, Blackbaud did their generation of giving study or whatever, then they refreshed it a couple years ago. And actually, Gen X is the second largest giving group, right? I mean, and they're not that much smaller than the millennials. I mean, I think if I remember the numbers, it was boomers and matures are 41% of total giving, but Gen X was 23% and millennials were 14%. So it's a pretty big difference there. So if we think about it from the nonprofit perspective, you shine a light on this, I mean, I think is really, really important, because, based on some of the data that I've seen from the preliminaries you put out there, I mean, the Gen Xers are probably prime to be perhaps the most generous generation.
Yeah, I think that the rise of wealth, and as you're saying, the sheer numbers themselves. I mean, not just as a giving cohort, but as a cohort overall, the fact that they are on par with millennial in size. And that was the other attraction commercially was, wow, look at this massive influx of millennials into the workforce. We've got to go after them. We've got to, understand how they want to behave at work, understand how to market to them, all of those things. And you're right. It has it's further alienated Gen X as a part of it. The thing that I find interesting is that maybe within pockets of nonprofits, they always had a Gen X marketing strategy. They just didn't realize it in advance, because that is something that the walk run and some of the initial peer-to-peer campaigns, those were definitely in that that frame of mind. But I just believe that there's a lot of, like you said, there's almost like this unvoiced choice to not market to them. And the reasons, well, they're raising kids, so they're not going to give, right? Which doesn't mean they're not going to engage, but they're raising kids, so they're not going to give. They're paying for cars, and they're paying for college and those sorts of things. And the data doesn't prove any of that out anecdotally, right? So we are kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face. Jared.
Yeah, and I want to comment on kind of the two points that you made. I mean, Tim, your point about how Gen Xers are giving, and Justin, you talk about the strategies that are happening, and I think that's one of the things that really sticks out to me is I think we've kind of fallen into marketing to some Gen Xers while we weren't necessarily intentional or strategic about it, which has helped lean into some of that giving that you're talking about, Tim. And
Right.
they've absolutely been a huge resource for nonprofits. We just have not been as intentional, and I think sometimes it's tied to we've kind of fallen into it because of the strategies being a little bit behind, like you were noting. And so, I mean, you think about over the last I'll call it 5 to 10 years, where nonprofits have really said, well, you know what, we got to think about millennials. We're going to engage with millennials. Where do we need to be if we're going to get millennials? We're going to go to social. We're going to go to Facebook. And so the thought, the thought being millennials, and I'm going to go get them, and this is our strategy. And it's like, you know what, you kind of missed the wave of millennials. But I think the last study I'd seen, 95% of Gen Xers are on Facebook. And they're spending 3+ hours on their mobile device. So when organizations have thought that they were kind of going after millennials with some of these strategies, they were actually getting the Gen Xers, but they weren't probably as strategic in their content choices and their engagement choices. And so what more can it be if we actually are really thinking of the right audience as we implement some of these strategies?
Excellent.
And I find that incredibly interesting, because one of the things, we're obviously our team, our analytics team at RKD looks at all kinds of factors, as we're looking at what donor behavior is. And one that's kind of emerging through the pandemic is that a lot of Gen X donors really stepped up to give during the pandemic. But then as we get further into it a few more months later, we're having this trouble kind of retaining them and keeping them around and getting them to give second and third and fourth gifts, like some of the baby boomers and silent generation are giving. So, thinking about that, like what maybe we're accidentally reaching them, what are some strategies and some approaches maybe that we could have to connect better with Gen X?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why we've seen kind of this boom in digital donor acquisition, is because of exactly what you said, Jared. Like, they all are on Facebook, and so are the boomers, by the way. Like, so my wife and I are posting pictures, and then grandma and grandpa are going and looking and engaging with those pictures, right? So like, that's how we actually stay connected to our family and share what's happening and going on. And you think about it, it's like, I mean, it's kind of like a digital fundraiser's dream come true, because it's like, I've got my audience, I can reach them. And then, because of the way that Facebook advertising works, like, we can micro test everything and figure out what is the exact right recipe and offer to kind of get these people to engage, get them to give, and then ultimately get them to commit to a recurring gift, which is how we really retain them. I mean, that's some of the things that we've been seeing to be really most effective with that audience, is trying to get them into that recurring giving relationship.
The thing about one of the things that came out of the study was that Gen X is 2 subgroups, and I mentioned it earlier. So there's older Gen X, which we've called the hometown heroes. And so this group, they act a little boomerish, a little bit. They've got an analog base, right? That analog foundation and perspective, and they're particularly interested in impact, like local impact. That's a thing that drives the older Gen X, these hometown heroes. And so about 73, 74 is that line, right? Post that, so 74 to 83 in terms of a birth year, that's when you get into the naturalists. And what marks this naturalist, this younger Gen X, is they're actually far more interested in kind of global impact versus local impact. And by global, it's things like animal welfare, environmental causes. There's a pretty significant dip in or fall off of their contributions to houses of worship versus the older Gen X. So there is this kind of divide that happens around the time where you see the rise of the internet and how it plays into the lives of these two folks. So the older Gen X, they would have seen the internet come about in college or in their first job. Younger Gen X would have seen it come about middle school, high school, and that changes the way that they behave and act. I'm curious from your perspective, because you mentioned, yes, Facebook is this fertile ground, and lots of social media is a very fertile ground. But how do you wrestle with that divide between two different audience groups or perceptions, and how does that play out into our marketing strategies?
I mean, I think for us, it's like giving them different calls to action of ways that they can actually get engaged. So like the older Gen Xers and the boomers, we find that they tend to be people that are actually interested in engaging their mind. So like they want to continue to enrich themselves. They're lifelong learners. And so giving them things that actually are meaningful content, like, an ebook or an online course or something that actually kind of like fulfills this idea that I am committed to continuing to enrich my body of knowledge. Where the younger people, it's a different kind of call to action. It's more of like an advocacy kind of thing, or activist type of role, or opportunities to participate in some sort of like virtual event or something like that. It's a different way to kind of get those people on board.
That's really fascinating, Tim, because you mentioned they like receiving ebooks and things like that. When we look at the study, one of the questions we asked was, I like receiving exclusive content that reports back on the work of the organization. 55% of baby boomers responded that they like that. 42% of older Gen Xers like that, but only 22% of younger Gen Xers and 26% of millennials. So clearly divide there. So that's really interesting that you're seeing it as well.
Well, it's an interesting way that we could begin to build segmented audiences. So like based on this data that you have now, like we know who we have based on what they're kind of responding to. So it's kind of like a really, I mean, this is blowing my mind. I'm really pumped to start experimenting with this stuff.
Well, and one of the things that really jumped out to me when we were thinking about content, like you mentioned, Ronnie, that content consumption, and I think the idea of Gen X being lumped into a single category has a lot of other studies I've seen with it lumped into a single category creates mixed results. So use another example of this. I found the top 10 favorite brands of Gen Xers, and tell me, I'll name just a couple and tell me if it seems a little off to you if you try to think of it as a single category. The number one rated brand of Gen Xers, or excuse me, number two was Amazon, but number 9 was Walmart. I mean, that's a pretty different type of group, and something tends to make me think that it might be older Gen X, younger Gen X, but they're getting merged together into a single category, and so both show up in this top 10. I mean, you see that there's a mixture of Apple and Netflix, but then you also have Ford, and you have Walmart, and you have Nike, and some more legacy brands, and so there's just this mixture. And I think there's an opportunity from a content perspective, just like Tim said, you start segmenting, you start thinking about different ways that you can engage and interact with them. And then I think there's another thing we can do from a content perspective, and really stealing this from the commercial sector, really building and playing off of Gen Xers nostalgia. Gen Xers love that. And, you think about the reboots of movies, and you think about, since I just mentioned Netflix, and you get Stranger Things, and how that just, brings in and pulls, Gen Xers, because it feels like they're re-engaging with their childhood. I think there's a lot of things we can do that actually can bring all of Gen Xers together when we think about some playing off of some of that nostalgia, but then starting to segment out when we think about content and ways that they're going to be passionate about. And the one last thing I'd add, especially on that line of Amazon and Walmart, and understanding, kind of these two different worlds, the brick and the mortar versus the e-commerce. And the fact of the matter is, I do think Gen Xers have a blend of those preferences, and they're what they like, that's different than millennials and that's different than baby boomers. And what we've really tried to focus on doing when we think about channel communication for our audiences is, there are some individuals that and possibly, you might label this the younger Gen Xers, where it's like, let's go really heavy with digital communication only. But there's a huge opportunity to have that mixture of communication, especially for Gen Xers and potentially the older Gen Xers, where you say, what's the opportunity to engage with them in what seemingly might be a little bit more traditional channels, whether it's a postcard in the mail or whether it's the events like you're talking about, Justin, earlier. I think there's ways that we can really tap into this market that's going to appeal to them.
Yeah, I think
we could always just embed like MIDI songs in the background of landing pages that play 90s 90s hits. So I mean, that always
there's
works.
something to that. There is definitely something to that.
The nostalgia angle.
It's if we could just start distributing the double CD with donation, like that's the premium. If we're sending them, sending some CDs, maybe laser discs. If it's a really high value gift, we actually send some laser discs.
You got to have about 5 of those laser discs though. When you get midway through the movie, big cliffhanger, switch out the disc, put it in.
Put the new one on. Okay, so kind of the last area that I think that we should explore as a part of our conversation is specific to the impact of the pandemic and what this has meant. So not in the study, but a study that I've been talking about quite a bit related to it was summer of last year, where McKinsey said that digital adoption had increased 7 years in about 5 months.
Awesome.
And it's fantastic, right? And so digital adoption, so you think about like, what does 7 years mean in digital? Like, what does that mean in terms of digital adoption? And then you go to everyday life and how it looks different now, right? For years, Tim, Jared, and Justin, we were trying to figure out, the QR codes would they actually ever mean something here in the States? And now they do. Now
if you like to go to a restaurant and order from a menu,
right.
You know how to use one now.
so there's that, but also the rise in seeing the the daily email from the USPS, right? So that you can see what is coming to your mailbox that day, right? In your inbox, you get the scans and the subscriptions that have gone up for that. What do you think the last year has meant for Gen X in terms of their connection to nonprofits? And what does that mean for you when you think about your clients going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 2020 gave us a much needed violent shove into digital transformation. And, one of the challenges always for us in the nonprofit space is that we don't have the same resources as for-profit commercial enterprises, right? And so a lot of the things that our donors are able to do, we really rely upon the for-profit space to spend the billions and billions of dollars to train the marketplace to adopt a different way of behaving. But since we were all in the same boat last year, it all kind of really happened. Like you mentioned the QR codes, which I think is so funny. I remember when they first came out, I was like the biggest fan. I was like, this is going to change direct mail forever. We can have somebody like pull up a video of somebody giving a story of something, and they can actually have this dynamic multi kind of channel experience through the mail. And then everyone's like, how do I do this thing? I need a special app. And like, they're all different. They didn't work. And, all that stuff has been smoothed out now, which is really kind of cool. So I mean, between that, the virtual kind of meeting thing, it was really interesting to see how nonprofit organizations kind of lean into this idea. Okay, we can't have our traditional fundraising event. And they started pivoting and experimenting with these different virtual events. The conference that we host every year, we had to go and turn it into a virtual event. And so we're like, well, how do we make it as awesome of a virtual event as we possibly can? And, there's still I'm a digital guy. I'm a Gen Xer. I guess I'm an old Gen Xer, right, Justin? But I still value deeply like the human to human connection, right? And that's something that we've uncovered through all of our research. It's something that, you and I have talked about for years, is that, look, people don't give to websites. They don't give to email campaigns. People give to people. And so, yes, we all now kind of know how to use all this stuff, but at the same time, we have to find ways to continue to humanize it so it doesn't become mechanical, formulaic, and it doesn't kind of leave the donor feeling, I guess, less valued or less engaged or less connected to the aspect of the relational component to, being a donor, right? I mean, like that's the special kind of experience. So, we did our little study thing last year where we were looking at, using our mystery donor data. And, we saw that every single month of the year compared to 2019 and 2020, the volume of email communication went up, right? Which means like digital was the lifeline for donors, and you probably saw like the charitable giving reports that have come out, and, yes, overall giving went up 2%, but digital went up 21%. And for the first time ever, it was more than 10%, 13% of total giving last year. So I think that's just really good news. And it probably points to something that, we've all talked about forever, this idea of moving to some sort of digital first type of fundraising strategy, where digital is not this thing that we bolt on to our, our existing program, but it's put in a position where it can lead. And I'm excited just to see, how nonprofits embrace that. We have some of our clients who are doing that. I'm on the board of this organization, and they've committed to that over the last 5 years. And now 43% of their total revenue comes from digital. They increased their digital giving last year 69%, which was huge, So it's like, and they're, a $28 million organization. So it's not small amount of revenue. So I think you're going to see more and more of that, honestly.
That's so awesome. Jared, what would you add there?
Yeah, I mean, I typically, try to break things out into two categories. You have your technology or channel adoption, and then you have your content. And so, from the technology or channel side of things, we've seen, like Tim mentioned, that adoption of activity, whether and how behavior was forced to change, and it was driven in large part by individuals' commercial experiences. I couldn't go to the store, so I had to order things online. The bank wasn't open, so I had to start doing my banking online if I was a holdout. My work, I was forced to do Zoom meetings across the board. Now all of a sudden that becomes my routine. And the fact of the matter is most people weren't just doing that for a month or 2 months. People did it for 6 months or 12 months, or still doing it almost 18 months in. So I mean, it really does change their behavior. They start adopting these technologies, which opens up significant doors for us for them to engage. Whereas before, if we want to bring them on a real virtual experience to understand what our mission's about, there's a healthy percentage of Gen Xers that 18 months ago would have been like, what, I'm out. I don't need to sit in front of a Zoom meeting or a virtual experience like that, this afternoon. And now it's second nature. And so I think that we really want to lean in to how those behaviors have changed from a technology standpoint and some of the channel adoption that's come up. From a content perspective, I think that one of the things we observed once again from both nonprofit and commercial spaces, the amount of digital content consumption just blew through the roof during the pandemic, as people were searching out ways that they could engage with new things, and you had people watching more video online, listening to more content than ever before. And I think that for us, it's trying to say, how as nonprofits, how from a fundraising perspective do we intersect with that? I mean, clearly people are craving content, and what that means, and we touched on this a little bit earlier about that context and what some people want, what some of the older Gen Xers want. We have an opportunity to share a lot with them, and if we can do it in an engaging way, if we can do it in a way that feels like it's true content consumption, and they just weren't advertised to, they just weren't marketed to via this email or through a landing page that's transactional, but it's engaging, it's informative, it's content that they want to consume, there's a huge opportunity out there. But how do we do it in such a way that's appealing to Gen Xers? And that's where I kind of go back to the fun things we can do, whether it's nostalgic things, or like Tim said, whether it's music things. What are things that we can engage with that really play off of the type of content that these audiences want and they're craving?
Good stuff. Just hey, as we wrap, I just want to know what's coming down the pike for the two of you. I want to, Tim, I want you to talk a little bit about Neo this year and what's happening there. Jared, I want you to share a little bit of what's on your radar and what you're thinking about for the next 6 months with what you're seeing. So yeah, so Jared, what's next? What's next for you?
Yeah, we've obviously spent a bit of time talking about the pandemic and talking about the generosity and like Tim mentioned, the significant increase in digital giving. And really what we're talking with organizations about is don't allow this to be just a blip on the radar. This should not be the earthquake, the hurricane that you got a big spike in donations and then you kind of fall right back down to your previous norm. We had a significant outpouring of generosity. We had people coming onto the digital channel. We had Gen Xers giving when they might have been slow to give before, and now they're on board. How do we actually engage with these individuals? How do we treat them like humans? Thanking them, acknowledging them, making them know that as new donors, as new individuals in this philanthropic space, that they're a part of something that makes a difference, and really treating them in a very intentional way. They're not just a part of your 100,000 emails that you have, and they're not a part of your just large advertising budget that you might pick off a few through it. But we're going to be intentional about retaining these donors and really increasing their long-term value for your organization so your mission can be more impactful. So we're looking at segmentation, we're looking at those donor journeys, we're looking at new content and ways to really deepen their affinity to the causes that they started interacting with during the pandemic.
Tim, tell us about Neo.
Yeah, so Neo's in Austin. The theme this year is Willy Wonka, so Chocolate River and the whole nine. It should be pretty wild. But yeah, I'm just happy to actually, be back in person. I think we've got a lineup of probably some of the best speakers that we've ever had. Part of our idea with that whole thing is how do we get some more of like what's happening on the bleeding edge of for-profit digital marketing into the nonprofit space. So usually like the majority of our speakers actually come from the for-profit space. And so I'm looking forward to that this year. But just to kind of, I guess, piggyback on what Jared said, in a word, what we're focused on as a company is retention, right? So we spent the last, 5 or 6 years or whatever proving that digital is a very viable channel to acquire donors at scale. And now it's like, okay, well, how do we also use digital to increase the relationship the donor has between the organization and the cause, and get them to continue to stay for the long term? And there's different ways that we can kind of motivate people to give, right? We can do certain things that kind of game the system. We get quick wins, and that's not really necessarily the best thing for the donor. So we've been working with the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy in the UK, Adrian Sargent, Jen Shang, and we're trying to take a lot of the stuff they're doing in philanthropic psychology and turn it into testable things that we can try online to try to build donor well-being and actually go for not what's going to generate the most revenue today, but what's actually going to generate the most revenue over the lifetime of the donor. I know that it's something that we talk about all the time. We talk about with our clients, and everybody's on board with the idea of lifetime value, but yet the decisions we make, oftentimes are at odds with that, right? We're still kind of like living hand to mouth and addicted to our direct response kind of mindset. So I think that that's something that as an industry, that's something we should all be focusing on. And I'm glad to hear that collectively, both of our agencies are really kind of moving in that direction. So that's awesome.
Gents, I it wasn't just lip service at the beginning. I really do think that you're two of the brightest in the space. And so as evidenced by our conversation and what you shared with Ronnie and I, it's just it's awesome to hear and glad that you have been able to dig into the study and enjoy it, and super excited, one, that it jazzes you to go back and try some things with clients, but also Willy Wonka's a Gen X thing. So, the old school, like OG Willy Wonka, that's definitely, you're already building some nostalgia with your marketing Tim, that we appreciate, certainly. So
I'm just trying to live out like every one of my wildest fantasies from my youth. So this is one of them. Check the box.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you both for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been a joy. So yeah, thanks for the time.